Okay, I think we should probably get started so we can get right to the heart of the matter today. I am Vicki Jervickus. I'm the Grassroots Engagement Manager at the Greater Gainesville Chamber of Commerce. And I'm with Atticus Steinmetz, who is our Economic Development Manager and also our technology guru. And he'll be fielding questions today and making sure we stay live, hopefully our entire session. We at the Chamber are just delighted today to have Dr. Michael Lauzardo joining us. He has been very much a source of comfort to us during this crazy year. And he's going to talk a little bit and then answer any questions that you have about vaccinations and the state of COVID. Dr. Lauzardo is the chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases and Global Medicine at UF. And he has directed the Emerging Pathogens Institute since its inception in 2007. Right now, he's been busy for the past year, of course, directing the COVID-19 Screen, Test, and Protect program at UF, keeping all our students safe and our community safe. Thanks again so much, Dr. Lauzardo, for joining us, and I'm going to have you jump right in and tell us everything we need to know.
Sure. So thank you very much, Vicki, and thank you, Atticus, also for helping us get online here. And also thank you to all of you who've taken out time from your busy day to kind of listen to and have the opportunity to ask some questions about vaccines and kind of whatever you might have related to COVID. This is an exciting time. And again, I know that seems strange to say after a very difficult 15 months for all of us, especially some of you in the business community whose businesses have been really adversely impacted, not to mention the impact on your personal lives as well. But I say an exciting time because we have a way out. We have a path to getting out, and what was only a promise and only an idea last summer, and certainly not even this time last year, wasn't even a thought, but what was a promise last year has now come to reality. And not only did we get vaccines, but we have at least 2 very good, very effective vaccines that have been very, very impactful in other parts around the globe and also here in the US, where we're continuing the rollout and really having the chance to, as I like to say, fight back against the pandemic. But nothing's really straightforward, right? We know that there are a lot of challenges that come with these opportunities. And so there are issues related to the vaccines in many people's minds. Again, the ideas of the different, the pace by which information was coming out, the challenges that we've had, trying to sort out what's true, what's not true, what are the challenges, what can we really face, what do we really give up, all these things where it seems like we've just got decision fatigue. There's all this stuff that's out there. The reason why we're doing this town hall today and doing numerous other ones throughout the community over the next several weeks is really to provide what we think is evidence-based information and to give people an opportunity to answer questions related to the vaccines. Because as I mentioned before, our way out of this mess is through immunity, and the best way to get immunity is through vaccination based on the scientific evidence and medical expertise that's out there. But also just know that a lot of people are hesitant. They have some very good reasons to be concerned or to have questions. But also there's a lot of myths and, believe it or not, some disinformation that's out there. In other words, deliberately placed information to really reduce our ability to get people vaccinated. But that said, to me, the real answer here is to just present good information and from trustworthy sources, and also to direct people to where they can find that on their own to make their own decisions. What I must have said in probably more than a dozen times over the last week, if not dozens of times over the last several weeks, is that I'm not in the convincing business. My hope here is not to convince anybody to do anything any different than they would have. My job here is to really just present you with information that I believe is that you can have confidence in, evidence that you can kind of double check, that you can kind of look and see for yourself, and also to counter some of the myths and misconceptions that are out there. And then let you make up your own mind for yourselves to decide what's best for you, what's best for your family, what's best for your community, and also to understand what our thinking is in the public health and medical community as we seek a path forward to get us back to what we really want, right? It's safety for the most vulnerable and community for all of us. In other words, we want to get back to the way things were normally and also learn from this so that we can actually improve on kind of where things were previously. So I'm excited about this opportunity. Now, what I'll do is, if it's all right with you, I was just going to just talk briefly about kind of where the pandemic is right now, not spend a lot of time on that, and then talk about the vaccines very briefly, and then just kind of take time for questions and really kind of have a question and answer session here. Because really, at the end of the day, I want to address your concerns and your questions, and again, see what you've got on your mind to kind of move forward. So in terms of, so let me go ahead and just jump right in then. So in terms of where things are with the pandemic, we're in a much better place. So as all of you will recall, over the holidays, numbers skyrocketed, right, across the country and really across the globe. And that happened very predictably because we were doing things indoors after traveling, meeting with people that we don't necessarily see every day. They're not part of our household quarantine. And in that case, we ended up doing things indoors, like taking our mask off to eat and drink. And that's what you do with family. It's understandable that that happened, but also very predictable without having the levels of immunity that we need, that we can get through vaccination. So numbers went up globally. As we went back to masking, stopped getting together, and again, I got together with family as well. It's a very natural thing to do at that time. But as we masked up more and kind of took more control back to the things that we knew that worked, rates started to come down. But they didn't go all the way down. They stayed at a very high level across the US and across the globe until we started vaccinating. And even as we vaccinated, remember that the way that the vaccine rollout has been was really for very logical reasons. We focused on the most vulnerable first. We looked at 65 and older, those who are in nursing homes. And as the limited supply of vaccines came out, we made sure that those were the people that got it first. It's exactly what we needed to do. And what that did is it didn't really affect the rates of COVID. And you go, well, how can that be? Well, just remember that people that are 50 and older are only responsible for about, actually 65 and older, are responsible for less than 1/4 of the transmission. The vast majority of transmission or spread of COVID is from people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So what we did is we spent a lot of time protecting the vulnerable, but what that did is it really started to have an impact on our hospitalization rates and our death rates. In other words, the number of people dying from COVID went way down. The number of people that were being hospitalized went way down, but we didn't do anything to stop the spread. So in other words, until you start vaccinating people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and to a lesser extent in their 50s, but 20s, 30s, and 40s, you're really not going to change the spread a whole lot. And ultimately, you can't protect those people in their 50s and 60s who haven't been vaccinated yet until you stop the spread. So you really have two targets with vaccination: protect the vulnerable, and then also protect the community. And the way you protect the community is stop the spread by stopping those who are spreading it from being able to spread it a lot easier. So yes, you protect them. And yes, people in their 20s and 30s and 40s are in the hospital. They're in the hospital right now, but that's not the big at-risk group. But their risk really is to the others because their ability to spread. So with that, now that we've started moving into vaccinating people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, when it opened up on April 5th in Florida, at least, we've started to see that higher percentages of people have been getting vaccinated. But here's the kicker, is that we're kind of hitting a little bit of a plateau. We've been using Ben Hill Griffin Stadium as a vaccine site, and we've been able to crunch huge numbers through there really quickly. We got 5,000 a day through Ben Hill Griffin Stadium, getting really quick numbers, very efficiently, very safely, and we're able to kind of sort of mass produce that. But now we're giving our second doses to those Pfizer vaccines that we were giving, and then also to a lesser extent Moderna. And now we're starting to plateau. The number of new vaccinations are coming down, and that's expected because this is the world according to Mike. So my wife has to put up with hearing this, so you're going to hear this now yourself. So really, in terms of vaccination, and I don't want to kind of make light of this, but it kind of does fall into these broad categories. There's about 20% of people that no matter what you say or do, you can walk on water and, as I say, pass out gold with each vaccination, and people are not going to get vaccinated, right? They've made up their mind for political reasons or based on misinformation, or they don't want to deal with it, or they're scared, or they've just assessed the information themselves and decided, I don't want to get vaccinated for me, my family, or my community. And I can respect that. Some of the other things difficult to deal with, but I can't change it. So they're off the table. 40% of people, you can make them swim across a lake filled with piranhas, and they will go do what they can to get vaccinated, and they're going to get that no matter what. So they're going to go there and get it done. But then there's what I call the middle 40, and that's where you've really got to work, because those are people that didn't say no. They just said not yet. And they're trying to figure out, is this safe for me to do? Should I do this? Is it the right thing for me, for my family, for my community? And really, it hasn't been a priority for them as of yet. And that's where the work is a little bit harder for us in the public health and medical community, is to talk to those folks and address their concerns. And that's really what's behind my desire to kind of have a lot of these town halls now, because in Alachua County, we're kind of one of the leading counties in the state in terms of rates of vaccination. and the sheer numbers as well, even though we're a relatively small county, we're now in that 40% group in that middle. And so how do we reach people's concerns? And really, from my perspective, is that go ask them, talk to people, get out in front and listen to people and what's on their mind and what's their concerns, and also share with them, the facts and data as we understand it, what our experiences are as physicians, as public health people, and then kind of let them know what we're thinking. And so that's really kind of where we are right here. So to the middle 40, what I really say is that there are a lot of reasons for people to get vaccinated. As I mentioned before, the idea that we're doing two things, protecting the vulnerable and those who spread and are less vulnerable. The idea is that we're doing this to protect our community as a whole. Many of you have heard of herd immunity, don't really know what that means. That really means population immunity. So at some point, when we get enough people vaccinated, we think somewhere around 70%, there are enough dead ends to the virus to where it just stops spreading, and that you don't have to get everybody. One of the nice things about public health is that it's like horseshoes and hand grenades. You don't have to be perfect, you just gotta get close. So in other words, we don't have to get everybody, but if we get close, there's all these dead ends, the virus can't spread, and then the pandemic ends. Yes, it's still around, and yes, people can still be in trouble if they get the virus and can get infected, but the shutdown, the mask wearing, the huge numbers of cases that we get, the hospitalizations, they plummet and they get down to very, very manageable levels. So that's what we're shooting for, is to get to that 70% or so. Right now in Alachua County, we're at about 50% with first dose, and second dose is not far behind. We've given about 110,000 first doses, and we've got about 79, almost 80,000 people have completed this series. So that's super exciting. But again, that last 20% to really see the numbers kind of bend and go down, that's key. So let me just show a contrast between two different things that we're witnessing here. So the way we set ourselves up is to be partners with the health department in our screen, test, and protect program on campus, and also in the vaccination effort, not just on campus, but throughout the community. That's including outreach to vulnerable populations who maybe historically have not been included or have been marginalized for whatever reason. People who haven't accessed care for one reason or another, both historically and then also real world realities. So we've been really doing what we can to work throughout the community. And through that effort, we've been able to get a lot of people vaccinated. But right now, and looking at the numbers, there's a sort of a tale of two cities, right? So there's the second largest city in Alachua County, which is UF, where right now we estimate that the vaccination rate on campus is probably somewhere about 70 to 80% of students, if you can believe that, and somewhere about 90+% of faculty. What we've now seen that when we started to hit those numbers, we are now looking at our positivity rate at about 0.2, 0.3%, 7-day average. That's phenomenal. We are now in the single digits of cases on campus daily right now, which is phenomenal as well. We were right up there with like half the cases in the county were on our campus, and those numbers have really dropped. Whereas the county still plateaued. The difference in vaccination between the two is about 20%. So in other words, we've got a little ways to go to the county to get to that threshold. And this is the part where we kind of claw and scratch our way up to getting to that 70%. So in other words, the mass sites, there's probably not 10,000 people today that want to get vaccinated immediately. If there were, come on and walk into the Ben Hill Griffin Stadium tomorrow, because we'll take you. But again, it's just, we've got to work. We've got to get the vaccines where people are and address the things that they're saying, yeah, but I have these concerns. So I'm just going to address some of those quick concerns, and then we'll take some questions here in a minute. But some of the common ones is that, I want to see what happens to other people, right? Yeah, it seems like a good idea. And yeah, I want to help my community and help myself. Yeah, but I want to protect my loved ones. But really, I don't think I really need to do it just yet because I'm not worried. I'm worried about this vaccine. They rushed it too quickly. I want to see what happens first. Well, with the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, we've given 220 million doses so far, and that goes up by about 2 to 3 million per day across the country. Those are huge numbers, and we are not seeing serious side effects in big numbers, anything more than what we normally see with vaccines, other vaccines, and in fact, much less. What is more common with Moderna and Pfizer, the COVID vaccines, is that there is maybe a little bit more arm pain. So it's actually arm pain is more common. So you got a vaccine, and you'll know that for about 24 to 36 hours. And a little bit of sort of the body aches the night that you get the vaccine. The next morning you wake up and you feel pretty good and it responds really well to Tylenol. Those things are more common, but the serious side effects to the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are much, much less common. I'm sure there are going to be some questions about the J&J or Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which was on a temporary pause for a couple weeks to see if the observed side effect was more concerning. And I had a lot of people point out and say, you know, gosh, I told you so. There were problems with these vaccines. But let's see what really happened there. So with the Johnson & Johnson vaccines, about 6.8 million doses had been given in the US at the time of the pause. Six events of blood clotting in the cerebral vascular system of just below the base of the brain were identified. That's at 1 out of a million. Again, a very serious complication that could have been associated with the vaccine, but they released the vaccine again and allowed it to be used once again with just a couple of warnings with some groups that may be at potentially higher risk. My point with that is that the system works because we don't just do a clinical trial and then say we're done. You continue to observe. Those clinical trials that had tens of thousands of people in it led to the emergency use authorization and essentially was the science that showed that these vaccines worked and were safe. Now the 220 million doses that have been given for Moderna and Pfizer really show that it works, but we continue to monitor. That monitoring system that we had in place for J&J picked up side effects that occurred 1 out of a million doses. That's remarkable. 1 out of a million doses, and we picked it up. So the system is there to find if there's any real serious problems, we'll pick them up. So that's an important thing to think about. Also, people are thinking in terms of, I don't really need it because I'm not vulnerable. So I think an important thing to remember in terms of the vulnerability is, yeah, younger people tend to be at less risk themselves, although I'll show you a bunch of hospitalized people right now at our hospital. They're in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. The main thing to remember is it's almost kind of like looking at it this way. So be careful here because my wife always says I have the worst analogies, and I'll let all of you judge if that's true or not. But just kind of think of saying that, well, I'm not vulnerable. I'm not in a vulnerable age group. So I'm going to be okay if this group is okay and it's a separate group. But infectious diseases don't stay in one age group. It's almost like being in a pool and having sewage pouring into the deep end of the pool, and you're in the shallow end and just say, well, I'll be good because I'm down on this side and nothing bad's going to happen to me over here. It's only a matter of time before what's going on in one age group will spill over into the other. And to be honest with you, it's difficult for us to kind of look at things this way because as Americans, we have an independent streak a mile wide, but in many ways, this is a community effort. And so we cannot think of all of us being truly safe until we're all sort of in that game and sort of protecting one another. So again, that community component is a very key part of the effort. So when you make a decision to get vaccinated, it's not just to protect yourself, it's to protect your loved ones who may be vulnerable and for those around you in the community. And again, we all get back to normal, the more of us that get vaccinated and kind of move on. There are some outlandish things that are associated with the vaccines and things that are out there that many of you have heard. We've heard these. There's no tracking device that's in the vaccine. There is no profit motive. These vaccines are 100% free of charge provided by the federal government. There's no chemical in here that's going to cause you to be able to be tested to find out any information about you. These are common things that we hear. Some less sort of outlandish things, but concerns, but are equally untrue, is that these are RNA vaccines, but they do not affect your own DNA. They do not affect fertility. They do not affect individuals' ability to do anything as far as we know, except for the mild side effects that they get for a short period of time. And even though we did see the issue about blood clots came up, remember, compare this to COVID, right? So the risk of just walking around and then getting COVID and then getting a blood clot is 16 times greater than your chance of getting a blood clot by taking the Johnson & Johnson vaccine if you're a woman of childbearing age. So again, the risks of just getting COVID alone are big, and people will say things like, oh, the hospital's filled with people who've had side effects from the vaccine. That is not true. To my knowledge, no one has died receiving the COVID vaccine as a result of that. I think there was one blood clot that was associated with that was being investigated, but in terms of 220 million doses, I mean, that's pretty impressive. And that's far better than the flu vaccine that I know many of you get annually and the other vaccines that you've gotten and that you've given to your kids. Again, vaccines are overall very, very safe. And we are very, very fortunate to have these vaccines, which are also very safe. So again, there are a bunch of other questions of things that I'm sure I haven't thought of. I do want to kind of finish my opening comments, which went a little bit longer than I expected, so I apologize for that. But the main thing here is to remember is that we have a way out, we have a way back to normal. We don't have to kind of find ourselves in a position where we don't have a real good option, where we have to kind of go through this, or that we have to pit ourselves one against the other. Science and evidence supports moving forward with the vaccines, and that's the safest way to get immunity, and immunity is our way out of this, to be able to get back to safety and community, and then kind of be able to move forward back to getting ourselves back to being economically active, being able to do the things research-wise, vacation-wise, travel, do all of those things, as we just so appreciate now that it's been 15 months of not being able to do that. So again, I will stop there and catch my breath, and then I'll be glad to take any questions, Atticus, that have come through.
While we wait for a few more questions to roll in, by the way, please share any questions you have right now, and I'll be reading off as many as we can get through. I'll just share a quick comment that I have, and that's that even though I know a lot of communities are doing great work, I'm especially proud of ours. Every time I read the numbers about how many vaccines we're getting out and how well we've handled this, it's hard not to feel a little bit of pride. I'm sure it's associated with having such a great research university. And, you know, so on that note, I want to thank you not only for the insight that you provided us today, but also for the actual labor you put into assisting our community with testing and screening and providing, you know, resources. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate that, but I will tell you that I've gotten in the habit of saying that I feel so much like the rooster taking credit for the sun coming up in the morning. I tend to be out there, and then people say thank you, and I appreciate that, and I want to graciously accept that thanks. But let me just give you a little bit of insight. So when we're at the stadium, we have 200 to 300 volunteers to make every one of those big vaccine days get pulled off. And I see people from every walk of life. It is a reflection of this community. Gainesville's awesome. I absolutely love living here, have loved raising our family here. And and that's why I think we've been able to do what we've done. Yeah, having a great research university matters. And yes, having a great academic health center, I mean, the #1 hospital in Florida, those things matter. But what really matters is Gainesville. And I think this is a great community, and it includes the business community and everybody else, because that's why we've been able to do what we do. People care about one another here, and it matters.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm sure that Vicky does as well. I can tell from her nodding that she absolutely agrees. I will go ahead and read off some questions. We've actually got a whole bunch, so
okay,
I hope
great.
you got some time ahead of you.
I sure do. Let's knock them out.
So, if someone is experiencing side effects from the vaccine shot, does that put someone who lives with them who hasn't had any vaccination shots at risk of experiencing the coronavirus symptoms?
No, not at all. So in other words, there are some vaccines that administer kind of like a live vaccine. There is no live virus, or I'm saying a live virus vaccine. There's no virus in the vaccines themselves. So you can't have symptoms and then act like you're sick and then spread it to someone else. So there's no virus that can be spread from one person to another. Also, it's kind of not really predictable who kind of has kind of like, you know, maybe more pain or kind of malaise and fatigue than others do. It seems to be that the youngest age groups maybe have a little bit more in terms of side effects, in terms of site pain, but it's really not that predictable. And so that's, again, it's usually very overall mild, and they respond really well to Tylenol, but there's no risk of infection to others based on getting the vaccine and being with others who've not been vaccinated yet.
What is your estimate on natural immunity to in the community?
Yeah, great question. So that's, and also I'll kind of add another part, which I think is implied by that question as well. So natural immunity is important, right? So it matters, and it helps us kind of get to that herd immunity component. Probably best estimates were that where we were before the vaccination effort, that we were probably somewhere about 30% of people had been infected with COVID in the US, and that probably accounts for Florida as well. Those numbers may be slightly higher for certain risk groups. Not to cast any aspersions here, but you know, say certain kinds of college students who maybe weren't guarding themselves might have infection rates that were higher. But studies that are now coming out show that natural infection is important, but not as strong as the immune response that comes from getting vaccinated. So in other words, reinfection and recurrent infections are going to be more common in people who acquired natural infections. So in other words, just got COVID themselves and are protected from some time. They're likely to get reinfected, especially if they had mild illness or were even asymptomatic. So that's why we're recommending that people get vaccinated. And that's why we think that's the way to have more enduring vaccination. Now, the data and the research is still being done, and there's more to your immune response than your antibody response. there's the T cell response, which is actually more important in dealing with viruses than the antibody response in many cases, and maybe a better indication of what's actually going on. So that natural immunity is important, but it's not enough to have it alone. And again, it's a riskier way for many of the vulnerable to be able to get that acquired immunity.
All right. The next question is, myself and a few friends have experienced menstrual spotting and various changes to our cycles after receiving the vaccine. Do you know what the reason for this is, or if there's any research on this sort of reaction?
There is research looking into that right now to kind of see what that may have been, and that's been anecdotally reported. So to my knowledge, it's not been something thoroughly studied to say this is what's clearly happening. But obviously there are cases, as your, the person who submitted the question here just reported. What it could be is, again, there's a pretty significant immune response. In other words, it's kind of an inflammatory response overall, and that immune reaction can kind of get your body revved up. So it's the same thing that kind of gives you that, I feel kind of bad at the moment, and then that kind of response can affect a menstrual cycle. We know that immune responses overall and inflammation can cause that. That should be passing, and there are ongoing studies looking at that right now. And again,
do you have any thought?
Overall, it's pretty uncommon, and that's not been something that we've been hearing a lot of reports and hasn't been published, but there have been reports, just as the attendant here on the call had mentioned.
Do you have any thoughts on pregnant women getting the vaccine?
Yeah, so great question. So that's something where we always say that to talk it over with their OB, because the initial studies did not include pregnant women. However, I don't know what the number is, but tens of thousands of women have gotten the vaccine who were pregnant and didn't know it at the time. And so those women are being followed, and there haven't been issues related to that. Nothing's been reported. There are now clinical trials that are ongoing with women who are pregnant being enrolled, looking at pregnant women and the vaccine. So those studies are ongoing. I think that, again, this is a discussion that a woman should have with her physician and talk through that. In this case, you got to keep in mind is that we don't believe that there are any risks associated with pregnancy in the vaccine. There needs to be more proof related to that. And the reports that we do have is that it is safe. We do know that there are risks to getting COVID while you're pregnant. And so you've got to balance those risks of being pregnant and getting COVID versus getting the vaccine and being pregnant. And so that's a risk benefit thing that each individual has to make on her own. Each woman needs to make on her own, and then talking it over with her physician. I think that's a legitimate concern for people to think of, because the fact that we don't have all the data as of yet in pregnant women, but they've got to balance that with the fact that we know that COVID during pregnancy can lead to some problems. It's not like some other viruses where it's a huge problem, but it has been identified with having some problem with women, with pregnancies for women during that time. So we should get some definitive answers soon, but right now the indication is it favors getting the vaccine while you're pregnant, as that's a safer route based on what we know right now. And that's the guidance, but again, the CDC leaves a big kind of caveat there that this is a personal decision for women to discuss with their physicians.
One person asked, if I have a child on a large amount of medication due to their special needs, should I be concerned about how the vaccine might interact with their medication?
Yeah, so right now the vaccines are approved for children 16 and older, and they will be approved probably very soon for children 12 and older. So it'll be extended. The youth emergency use authorization will be extended to them here shortly, probably in the next couple weeks at the most. So in terms of interacting with medications, there's the only real contraindication, or the only reason why someone medically should not get a COVID vaccine is that if they've had a vaccination within the last 2 weeks. So they should put that off until 2 weeks has passed. And then also if they've had a severe allergic reaction to the first dose of the COVID vaccination. Otherwise, there's no real medicine or a medical contraindication or medication that we think is going to cause a problem, and maybe that where they would not need to take it. And many people who are on multiple medications are at increased risk. They may have other conditions. I don't know what this woman's child might have, But in other instances, people are on medications for immunosuppression, or older people are on blood pressure or diabetes medicines. Those are folks that we really want to get vaccinated because we know that those are people at greater risk.
We still have plenty more. I hope you're all right with that.
No, I'm good. I'm good. No, trust me, I can go for a very long time. So I'm good.
So do you think we'll need to get a COVID vaccine every year going forward, like the flu vaccine?
Yeah, it's a great question. Initially, the thought was that would probably happen. Some people misinterpreted and said, I'm not going to get the vaccine because it only lasts 3 months and I don't want to get a shot every 3 months. That is not true. And in fact, the Pfizer and I think Moderna as well released data looking at how long the immunity lasts. And right now, the data came out 3 weeks ago that showed that at 6 months, the immunity really wasn't any different than it was during the studies. So it lasts at least 6 and 9 months, and those are ongoing studies. There have been other studies in the lab, because again, not enough time has passed, right? So the vaccines weren't around, more than a year ago. They were developed in the labs since that time. Started those clinical trials a little bit less than a year ago. But in laboratory studies looking at T cells, human T cells, and their response to the coronavirus and that have been primed with the vaccination, in those studies, it looks like there's actually a very strong T cell response where that booster may not be necessary as soon as we thought. Again, that's an evolving science. My gut feeling is that probably they're going to do a booster probably at a year, and then after that, probably not 2-3 years, maybe not even that often. I don't know that it's going to be like every year like the flu. The reason why it ended up being assumed that it was going to be like the flu is that there are 4 human coronaviruses before the COVID-19 came out. Those 4 human coronaviruses cause colds. We've all had them before. And in fact, there's a theory that the reason why young children don't get as sick and why young children don't have the serious complications is that their immune system is primed because they get coronaviruses every other day, it seems, right? Having been a parent of 2 small kids, and they seem to get it every other day. And so in that case, they're primed and they're in a different place. And so the thought is that they keep getting reinfected with the same one. So the thought was, oh, well, that same thing is going to happen with COVID-19, which is a bat/human coronavirus mix. And that may not be the case. And so we're just still learning about how long that immunity will last, but it does appear and everything is pointing towards the direction of the fact that immunity from the vaccines is really, really good.
You mentioned a booster, potential for a booster. One person asked, do you think there will be as much of an immune response to a booster in the future?
Yeah, I think so. It's hard to know exactly, but I think there will be a really good response. And then also know that the mRNA technology, the mRNA vaccines are very adaptable. So they can be changed to meet any ongoing strains or new strains that might come out. And so those are things that could work really well. And they're really easy to change. I mean, it's almost like a plug and play kind of a thing. And so right now, the technology is actually the point where you can get vaccinated against theoretically an unlimited number of different pathogens with one shot with the mRNA vaccine. So in other words, the technology really opens the doors to be able to have a much more effective vaccine.
I really like this question. Should which vaccine I get be part of my consideration, or should I consider them all equal when I go to get vaccinated?
Sounds good. What I was saying up until just recently is that the vaccine you should get is the one you can get tomorrow. But now vaccines are very available and readily available. And right now we don't know which one's a better option for people. They perform really well, either Moderna and Pfizer, and also Johnson & Johnson performs really well also. I think that for younger aged women, I think even though the chances like 1 out of a million, there is now a black box warning for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so I think the chances are incredibly low. I mean, your chances are greater to get struck by lightning than it is to kind of have some of these complications. But, I'm not saying that to make light, it's just the reality. The odds are really, really low. The risk is low. But I would say either the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine are easy enough to get for anybody. And there's no real clear winner over one over the other.
I have a sort of a wordy one from someone. I'm trying to think of how to pare it down. And I don't mind making fun of them because I know who wrote this question. A lot of people seem to have fear or reticence around de-escalation from their cautious habits over the last year. And they were hoping that a vaccine would alleviate a lot of the paranoia and mandatory restrictions, et cetera. Is continued hard line on safety needed with the vaccine to continue similar behavior over the past year, or should we expect more of a return to normal after the vaccine?
Yeah, great question and a very important one. And I'm going to stand up for the wordy people out there because I'm one of them. So I'm going to kind of, I thought that was a great question. So that's an interesting question and on several fronts. So the first one is that, we've been beaten down. I mean, I think we're going to look back at these times and realize that we underestimated the psychological impact of all that we've been through. And that's regardless of what end of the spectrum you are on in terms of what you thought about the pandemic, how it was responded to, what we did or what we shouldn't do. So there's a big impact. And I'm pretty much I've been out there. I've never spent a single day home during the beginning of the pandemic. I've been out in the field. I've been in contact with hundreds of people with COVID. I've been working in this mess since the very, very beginning. But I tell you, the first time I took my mask off in a group with 3 people or 4 people that we were all vaccinated inside our conference room, I was like, wow, this is like a thing. This is different. And I won't say that it was difficult. I was very happy to do it. And I'm now have my mask on. I'm in my war room here at the Emerging Pathogens Institute. And we don't wear our masks in the conference room, but it does feel different. And so I can imagine people who haven't had that experience, who haven't had that exposure, who may have been in lockdown and literally in their house for the last 16 months because of their medical conditions and were appropriately worried before a vaccine was available. So I think for many, it's going to be a big, big jump. That said, we also have to just learn to accept good news, right? It's like the vaccines work. And so being able to do more without vaccines, with those who've been vaccines and do things without masks, without socially distancing, that's going to increase over time. The more that we get vaccinated, the better that is, because the more we get vaccinated, the less virus there is circulating in the community. And as that goes down, all of us get protected. So the reason why initially the guidance has been, if you've been vaccinated, still wear your mask, and nothing really changes except the fact that you get to say, I got vaccinated. But those things are going to start lightening up more and more and more as more of us get vaccinated. And the reason being is that there's less virus circulating in the community. The risk to those who have been vaccinated, who might have a breakthrough strain, who might get overwhelmed with a large burden of virus is really, really low. Because remember, the vaccine is not an on-off switch, and your exposure is not an on-off switch either. So it's more nuanced than that. It's like, well, if there's a ton of stuff swimming around, you're going to overwhelm your system even if you are immunized. But again, we're getting to the point where that's getting better. There's also, as we move along, the CDC 2 days ago said no masks outdoors, which I was never a big believer in anyway, but now that has been lifted. They also said the small meetings indoors with vaccinated people can be lifted as well. And we'll continue to lift those restrictions as we move along. There was a reluctance, and I still am reluctant to say, yeah, if you're vaccinated, go live your normal life, because there are a lot of unvaccinated people, and there's still a large number of viruses that are still a large viral load, if you will, that's still circulating in some places. And the variants, even though I'm not a big believer that the variants are the boogeyman and it's going to cause the end of all of us, there's some legitimacy to being concerned about that. So the less transmission we have, the longer we wear the masks during this initial phase, we're really close. So it's like, again, you're up by a touchdown. There's a minute left in the game. You've got to get a first down to kind of end the game. You don't put in all the third stringers and then show up on the field with 8 guys, right? You just play it out. Play it until the final whistle, and then you're done, right? So we can see the finish line. If we can get 30,000 more people in Gainesville vaccinated, and get that middle 40, as I say, this ends in June. For us in Gainesville. Again, there's still the rest of the country, there's still the rest of Florida, there's still issues, but in terms of what we can do as a community, this can end in June. And again, nationally, if we go down that same road, this can end in June. We can travel, we can do all these other things, and it just gets better. And again, we are part of a larger whole. No community is an island unto themselves. You'll eventually have to be able to get there in all places, but things dramatically get better if we just kind of play to the whistle, just keep going. Don't give up yet. We're really close. I have no desire to wear a mask on my face. I'm just like everybody else, but just let's play to the end and we'll get there.
I appreciate the analogy.
Yeah.
How are vaccine side effects tracked and reported? I'm kind of curious about this too.
Yeah, there's multiple different ways. So there's different systems that CDC has built up. So I'm going to get I should have looked up the abbreviation, but it's the VAES. So it's the Vaccine Adverse Effect Surveillance System, I think, and that's run by HHS. So there's also an app that you can download after you've been vaccinated. So you can just say, hey, all my hair fell out, or hey, broke my ankle, or whatever it is, you can post it. CDC collects that. And then if they see patterns where it's like, hey, 25 people had their hair fall out in the past 2 months when we rolled out this vaccine in this place, we need to investigate. So that'll be looked at on a macro level. And so it's big data analysis from self-reports. And then also there's physician reporting. So I actually reported what I thought was a serious side effect that came through our system and reported that on to CDC. And then that gets evaluated in depth by both FDA and CDC. And then there's also individual reporting things that are going on, as well as ongoing sub-trials. So in other words, we just started a clinical trial on campus with Moderna, where we will report any side effects that go on with Moderna in college students and their infectiousness. So there are all these different systems that are in place that should be able to pick that up on a global scale and also locally as well.
Oh, so I only have one more question, unless someone asks any more in the next 15, 20 seconds. And that is, if I'm vaccinated, do I still need to quarantine if I come into contact with someone who tests positive for COVID?
No. It's a straight answer, no. So once you're the CDC guidance and the Department of Health policy, and our policy on UF is the same, that once you're fully vaccinated, that is 2 weeks after your second dose of Moderna or Pfizer, and you're in contact with somebody who had COVID, you're not considered a contact. You are not put in quarantine. Now, if you develop symptoms, there are breakthrough cases with the vaccines. They're not perfect, right? So you can still get sick. So recommend, hey, if they're not a family member or someone in your own household, don't hang out with the infected person. Don't go looking for it, because you could still get infected. But in general, we would not consider you a contact, say if it was your coworker who's in the, the cubicle next to yours and they were a case and they're at home isolating because they didn't get vaccinated. That's an important thing to remember. And that's part of the freedom that you do get. And I do think that mask usage, as we get more people vaccinated, mask usage will be less and less important. Social distancing will be less and less important. Cleaning of services, please stop doing that. You don't need to do that any more than you normally clean things. So there are a number of things that we can start doing now. And again, the more we get vaccinated, the better off we are, and the sooner we get back to normal.
All right, so there were no, to my knowledge, any last minute questions. Do you have any closing remarks you really want to share?
Yeah, I think one last thing I would say is that, again, one important thing to remember that with people that are still in the hospital, right? So as I mentioned earlier on, is that we had this drop that kind of came and then we plateaued, and we're still trying to nudge that further down, but we're stuck because you still have ongoing transmission in the community from people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And again, to a lesser extent, people in their 50s. But in that case, it's important to remember that people in the hospital who have COVID have one main thing in common, and that is that none of them have been vaccinated. Nobody with COVID in the hospital has been vaccinated. Now, again, there's someone that got admitted recently who had another medical problem, was found to have COVID, but that's not what drove him into the hospital. But the main thing to remember is that this stuff works. It works really well. And there are three countries that are ahead of us in the vaccination process. So the UK, Israel, and surprisingly, Chile has done a really good job with vaccinating people. And what they have done and what they have shown is that there's a precipitous drop in hospitalizations, then a precipitous drop in deaths, and then case numbers really go rock bottom once they start to get in those 60-70% range of vaccination. And so we're teetering on that. We're not there yet. We just got to make one final push that just let's have a great May and get people vaccinated so we can just get back to normal and have an amazing summer. So that's really what I'm looking forward to.
Dr. Lauzardo, I was expecting this to go well, but it went even better than that. I think we got a lot of really good questions, and I really appreciate all your responses. Thank you so much.
No, you're very welcome. You had some great questions and a great audience here. And so again, I appreciate it. And again, like I said, it's just, we can do this. We're getting close. And again, I really respect where people are coming from, but we'll just keep putting out the best information we can as much as we can. And thank you so much for doing this and being a part of the, having the business community help and support our efforts is fantastic. So thank you all very, very much.
Dr. Mike, I want to I'll throw in the sports analogy. That's not an Atticus thing, but it is a my thing. And we've all, those of us who follow sports and have favorite teams, We've all had that sickening feeling when they're high-fiving on the sidelines or they're spiking the ball as they're crossing the 2-yard line. And oh, lo and behold, they lose the game. So I
Exactly.
appreciate your point, and I hope that everyone watching will, if you'd like to share this webinar with your friends, your family, your coworkers, other businesses, we'll have it posted on our website shortly, certainly by tomorrow morning. And please do that, because we really do want to get the word out. And I think the 30,000 people number is a great one that we can help support and hopefully help push the needle so we can be just enjoying life this summer the way we want to.
Yep.
Thanks again, Dr. Mike. We love you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.